Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to a slightly different Environmental Sciences weekly seminar. This week we are running Environmental Sciences Question Time. We're doing this in the format of the BBC programme on a Thursday night. We have actually managed to get hold of David Dimbleby's actual time for the event. And this will actually be chairing the proceedings over the next 45 minutes or so. The format will be, there'll be questions from you guys. Those questions have been pre-selected, and you'll know, I hope, via an email conversation that you're included in that, and you might even have some idea of the running order if you're involved in all of that. I welcome inputs from the audience, so if you want to join in the debate, please put your hand up. We have a roving microphone, which will be dealt with by Jamie, so if you're invited to speak, please wait until you've got the mic in your hand. We are filming this show, and we're intending to put it on YouTube with a link from our website. So if any of you have any objection to that being filmed, please let me know at the end, and I'll try and confirm consent via email before we're finished. So, away we go. And first of all, it's my pleasure to introduce our panel. They're in the order they are on my clipboard rather than the order they are before you. I have Kate Schreckenberg, who most of you know. Kate has a background in forestry. She studied initially at Oxford, where she did a bachelor's and master's. She's then worked for, amongst other things, UNESCO, the Overseas Development Institute. Her main area has become non-timber forest products, ecosystem services and the well-being of people. And she's currently involved in major international projects about poverty alleviation in forested landscapes, working in places like Malawi, Madagascar, Peru and Colombia. So that is Kate. Over on my far left is Richard Lemon, someone who you probably will not recognise, although some of you may do because he's been a regular guest speaker here over the last 20 years or so, which is when I first encountered him when I was a student here myself. Richard has had a long career as a spatial planner, rising to a senior level with Hampshire County Council, and more recently working for Natural England. And I've invited him because I know he has an opinion on everything. To my immediate right, wearing a suit that is nearly as smart as mine, we have William Warren, who is a third-year Bachelor of Science undergraduate student. I've invited William because I'm currently supervising his dissertation on extreme weather and food security, and I know that he's an excellent speaker and very knowledgeable on such things. He went to a bit of a posh school, which you'll be able to pick up the way he talks, and he's from Northampton. And on my left from Southampton, we have from the second year Nathan Fox, who is on our bachelor's. I'm on the masters, I should know that, shouldn't I? He's a member of our Environmental Sciences Student Society Committee and takes the role of student officer. And he briefly explained that to me, and it sounded like he does absolutely everything for the committee, so the rest of them don't have to do anything at all. Is that about right? Okay, well maybe not. And last but by no means least, on my far right we have Talia Sherrod, who is a PhD student working currently on biodiversity and sea defences. Talia has come to us via Glasgow and Leeds, studied for her first degree in Glasgow on marine biology, and then at Strathclyde on civil engineering, where she did a master's, and she's now trying to marry together biodiversity and civil engineering concerns by doing things on sea defences on the south coast. My first question then is going to come from Brad Williams, who is on our MSc Biodiversity and Conservation. And when you've got the mic, Brad, it is over to you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to ask quite a broad question, but I think it's fairly fundamental to our future, our sustainable future, really. And it comes from watching Simon Reeves's Sacred Rivers BBC programme, and he travelled to China and up to the Yangtze River, where he came across the three gorges down. So my question to you really is, what do you think is more important today, the need for human development or the conservation of nature? And if we can maybe reach a compromise between the two. Okay,
no one wanted to go first, but Richard is going to.
Yes, volunteered, press gang, whatever. Thank you very much. Very interesting question. I've not watched those programmes yet, recorded them, but I'm sure they're very interesting. He's a very stimulating presenter. What you say, what is more important? I don't think I could come to a conclusion on that one, but the thoughts I had about this were really related a lot to do with my my background, which is as a planner. I worked as a planner for county council and government and then national park. And the planning system of this country, as I don't really know, has been in serious decline since the coalition government came into power. Not that I'm being political. When I was working planning, it was the systems put in place to control development and control its impact were developed really over the years I was working, and they were all to the good. And I think you can pretty clearly say that in this country, development won't go ahead unless it's been severely tested. And the European laws that have come in on Habitats Directive, etc., have helped that enormously. And we have got a very black and white issue there in terms of habitat and species impact of development. And because the problem is that in many parts of the world there is no planning system at all, or at least nothing that really controls development in its environmental impact. And just as an example of why a good system is required, I was thinking about this the other day when I was in one of the national parks. That most of the national parks in the UK have been there since 1947, and yet they're now taken for granted by people. If you try to impose one now, which happened recently on South Downs in the New Forest, there was huge controversy. So once these things are in place, they become accepted. And so I think that's what my first point is about the need for a good system to control the impact of human development at the same time as protecting the environment. Whether one is more important than the other, I don't know. The other thing that we need to take into account in all of that, which planning doesn't really take into account, is the impact of the lifestyles and the behaviour of that population. I mean, if for example, everybody in a town cycled to work, there'd be a hugely minimised impact on the environment of that new town or that development area, and didn't produce waste, reduced its water consumption, etc. So all the things I'm sure you're familiar with. So I think that's another issue to take into account. If we could control the impact of the human population on the environment through all those very simple measures. I've just been talking to a guy this morning about the Green Deal and having it installed in my house. So there are all sorts of things we can do. So I think that's the second point that needs to be developed in more with more serious intent. But of course, it all means possibly restricting people's lifestyles. And as you know, there's popular political thought now that people shouldn't have the lifestyle restricted. They should be able to do what they want, wherever they want, and where they want. Well, I think that can't happen. So if I was to be political, I would urge you all to vote for people who think that there should be some control over what we do and how we do it, where we live, etc., etc. I won't go on too long. I want to mention one other point, taking the Simon Reeve sort of example of experience in an undeveloped country on one of the big rivers. I've just been to the Ladakh. I didn't go looking for snow leopards, but it was a snow leopard area. But we heard there that the population of snow leopards is increasing quite dramatically now. That's because the government now pay any herder or herdsman who loses a sheep or a goat to snow leopards. So therefore they don't kill them. Snow leopards take off. So there are always things to do like that as well, which can control that impact. The unspoken issue here, of course, is population control, which I think might crop up later. So we'll leave it to them. Is that okay, Marco?
That's fine. Thank you very much. Good start. Will.
Well, I've been to the Yangtze River, and to describe its colour is to find out how many shades there are between brown and yellow, and you'd be amazed. And you find all sorts floating on top of it, like entire shoes, bits of cars, all this kind of thing. And the Three Gorges Dam is a sight to behold. It's even on a cruise ship, you're looking up at something at least 3 times the height of the ship, and it's quite amazing. But to make the balance between development and conservation, we can't go 100% either way. One might argue that China has gone too far in the human development area, but the reason they're making such steaming progress is there is a lot of cases where they'll do the documentation, but you could say off the record that there's some issues they simply don't care about. They're willing to sacrifice for the greater good. And again, it's an issue you need to solve with raw figures that's subjective at its core about what is the greater good. Is nature as a whole the greater good, or human development as a whole the greater good? If you were to take something like the Yangtze River, which is a massive ecosystem resource, away from China, it would decimate the local economy. If you were to impose something like the EU water directives that we have currently in this country upon that right away, it would do the same in crippling them, essentially. I think the EU water directives is a good way to start this because it's proven that we can clean up the Thames and such rivers that were historically massively polluted and produce a lot of smog, because the smog in China is far beyond what it used to be in London. And I think if you start stepping towards that gradually, you can find the balance. And I think what the EU Water Directive currently does is somewhere around the balance point I would put to the panel. My evidence for that is pretty much non-existent, I'll admit, but it manages to keep a lot of the systems of the major rivers, and it manages to keep them clean enough for certain indicator species to return. So there is a balance, and I think it's around that sort of point.
Okay.
What happens if we come out of Europe?
But no, we'll keep it.
We can't. Anyway, carry on.
Some interesting things coming out of this. So while you're getting these points from the panel audience, please get some additional points ready so we can open the debate. Kate, I saw you nodding. Would you mind me picking on you next?
Sure. I managed to watch the Ganges episode of this series, and I think what struck me was how well the presenter managed to show that our cultural history and our culture is linked to our environment as well. So it's not just about human development in the sense of growth, but also thinking about cultural practices and how much they are interlinked with the environment that we grow up in. And he showed some good examples in that one, in that episode, of different ways that the river is being polluted. Some, like in Varanasi, where people go to die because it's a holy city, and if you die there, it's very good for your afterlife. And so they're burnt, and you have bodies and all sorts floating down the river. Now that's a cultural practice. Maybe one could work with the people who are doing the burning to make sure that burning is done as completely as possible to avoid pollution. It's a different kind of level of pollution from other places in the river where you've got factories, a lot of leather and tanning factories and other textile factories which are polluting the river incredibly, and that could be regulated in a very different way. I think your example of the Thames is a good one, Will, because it can be done if you've got the right planning environment. I think the rivers that are shown in this series are a really good metaphor, if you like, or a small-scale illustration of the problems we're facing at the global level. So that you have people taking decisions at local level. We have certain resources that we have to manage at global level or at country level for the Yangtze or the Nile River across many different countries, and we don't have the governance institutions yet to govern properly at those levels. So for me, the challenge is really getting the institutions at the right level to manage those resources that cross boundaries.
Right, so I'm looking at the side of my panel. Would you like to chip in, Taya?
Yeah. Well, for me, I guess I look at it and I think you can't really have human development without nature conservation, and you can't have nature conservation without human development. More specific to the Simon Reeves thing about the sacred rivers, I haven't managed to watch them all the way through, but when you look at that kind of perspective, I know a lot of these rivers have got very historical and religious meanings to them. And then as a lot of them have touched on the pollution and everything coming from that, you kind of need human development and implementation there to kind of preserve those sacred aspects of it. So without human development, you can't keep a nature conservation such as that, and you can't have people using them as they have done for many, many, like hundreds of years. So I think that's an important thing, that where human development really kind of comes into it, and also it preserves the nature conservation there. I guess when I first saw this question, my thoughts kind of came straight to my research that I do, which isn't to do with the sacred rivers, but I work on like coastal defence structures, primarily in the south, which I know that Richard's also looked at. And here we've got kind of a lot of coastal erosion. So we need human development there to kind of preserve our natural resources. So if we don't have that, well then we're going to lose all our natural resources already. So we are preserving nature, I think, through human development. So I think you're right, there needs to be a compromise. Kind of, we can't go without human development. That's an essential thing. If we just left it and we didn't do any development, well then we've got population increase. We're going to lose a lot of our natural resources. So we do have to step in and we do have to help nature along with this. But I think it's taking the right actions. So for me, part of my research is looking at how we can use nature to enhance engineering methods. And I think that's something that in a lot of these cases we need to start looking at and seeing whether we can apply those so that human development isn't just, you know, sticking in or ruining the environment completely. It's using nature to help it. So.
Okay. Nathan?
I just feel it's slightly hypocritical that the Western world hinders human advancement in less economically developed countries. We went through a stage of the Industrial Revolution where we polluted the majority of our country, we deforested the majority of our country. Yet we're sat here and we're imposing carbon emissions schemes and everything else to stop the development of other countries. Okay, they shouldn't be polluting, but we shouldn't restrict their development. For example, there's now only 6 northern white rhinos left in the world, but that is a source of income for local people. Even though it is an illegal ivory trade, those people need the resources, but they're the ones that are depleting it. They should manage it themselves. We shouldn't involve ourselves with them and hinder their development until we've really worked out our situation as well.
I disagree with that. I think we completely need to step in because that's the whole point of a developing country. We're giving them resources and knowledge that we have to help them develop at a quicker rate. It's fortunate that we've managed to develop a little bit faster, but if we don't, well then they're going to be extinct, and then, I mean, I know what you mean, that it is their livelihood and that's their decision, but we can still step in there and we can make a difference.
We shouldn't make them dependent on us, is what I'm trying to say.
You're bringing the example of the Industrial Revolution kind of implies that it's a straight ladder and you have to touch every rung on the way up. When in fact, with the global network as it is, you can give people a boost and skip out this more damaging stage. For example, were you here last week for the Enactus projects?
Yeah.
You had going straight from use of gas to solar power within a much shorter time period than we had. And being able to speed up that development is crucial to avoiding the massive impacts. But we need to avoid the massive impacts by speeding up development, so yes, we should interfere.
Could I just add a further question? Going back to the Yangtze example, you actually visited it yourself. The construction of the Three Gorges Dam on the Yangtze is one of the factors that's contributed to the extinction of the Yangtze River dolphin, which I believe hasn't been seen at all in the wild for 5 or 6 years now. So it is effectively extinct due to probably a combination of human activities, but the thing that finally tipped it over the edge was probably the construction of this megastructure. So do you think human development should take place at the cost of an advanced form of life? And what does the audience think? Yes, Brad, you started this.
When it comes to like conserving one species or improving the livelihood of hundreds of thousands of people, like putting them out of poverty, how do you argue against that?
Well, the dolphin has a very... If it was something like one insect species, then fair enough, but the dolphin is a slightly special case because there is some research that suggests it's one of the few other sentient creatures on the planet. Now that's very debated, but it's certainly an extremely high level of consciousness. They apparently dolphins have names for each other and work in very close nuclear families, much like humans. And it depends how much you take that into account, because if it was, speaking completely fantastically, if it was an underwater species of humans, for example, then will we do it? I mean, you could even go way back into caveman era and say, was it fair of us to wipe out the Neanderthals for their resources and so on? So it does depend where you draw the line.
Right, depends on where you draw the line. I'm going to draw the line on this first question because I was intending to spend just 5 minutes on each one, and I spent nearly 15 on just the first one. So thank you, Brad, and thanks to the panel. Second question is going to be asked by a third-year student, Lydia Butler, who is also the Students' Union Ethics and Environment Officer. So Lydia, I hope you're ready.
This is a question maybe aimed at Will first, because of your dissertation. So the UK is highly dependent on food imports, but considering many of the countries that we import from are suffering crises such as climate change, drought, and heavily conflicted areas, how are we meant to tackle food insecurity, and should the UK try and be completely sustainable in their food resources, what should we do about that issue?
Okay, so our question is about food security in the UK and how we're dependent on other countries around the world and how those resources can be provided sustainably. Will, something that relates a little bit to your own area of research at the moment.
Not entirely, but yes, it is in the same area. Well, the problem is the UK has always been slightly, for the entire century, has been fairly dependent. I mean, the North Atlantic convoys were the one thing that kept us alive in World War II. And the problem is kind of split up into three factors. You've got supply, demand, and distribution. You can go for either two extremes of dealing with this. You can go for leave the system as it is and open to a lot of risk, or you could, if you were so inclined, propose a rationing system. Now, that would be extremely controversial, as everyone knows, but it has got many benefits of its own kind. I mean, when the rationing was introduced in the Second World War, it was well documented that although a lot of the more wealthier people ate a lot less well than they were used to, they were getting their a healthy diet, and it was like having the 5-a-day enforced. And the poor certainly ate a lot better than they normally would have, scavenging for scraps. The problem is, again, it arguably impinges on a lot of freedoms. How do you fix supply? Well, there's a lot of research in genetic modification, which is controversial for all the wrong reasons. I personally think we should press ahead with that, but I'm not entirely sure it should be the first line of defense or offense, so to speak. You have stepping into foreign countries to ensure your supply, but that, again, that's a very, very slippery slope. I wouldn't recommend.
Would it not be possible for us to be food secure ourselves, in that for a lot of the commodities like meat and dairy products, for example, we export around about the same amount as we import, which keeps the world turning around and makes money for people, but maybe achieves little otherwise. Richard, you're humming.
Well, I was going to make a similar point, in that there's an awful lot of focus now on what we eat and how much we waste, and the, transferring from to a non-meat diet and the impact that has on the environment. I think that's, as well as what you're saying, not necessarily exporting everything we produce in this country, also changing out the nation's eating habits. And I don't know what the figures are, but I'm sure we could go a long way down in terms of our export reliance if we did move to a largely non-meat diet. And also the other thing that this is a personal thing, that is that every time you go to Sainsbury's or any other supermarket, you get every fruit virtually, apart from English strawberries. It's the only one that runs out. And to have an orange every day of the year, or a banana, it's never a treat. I used to have an orange in my Christmas stocking that you guys did, because they were good in the winter, and that's when you got them. And it was a real treat. And Seville oranges, that takes place now, just in February you get Seville oranges. So I think if we were perhaps there's more education about what we eat and its impact on the world environment and its import costs, and also a return to eating what's seasonally in favour.
I used to get tangerine in my Christmas.
Tangerine.
Nathan, is that what you get in your Christmas time?
Yeah, it is actually. I'm not a very good
Or
person.
was it a cherry chocolate orange?
Yeah. That's the substitute, the sugar substitute.
Do you,
I agree that the UK isn't secure in the food industry. As we learned from Kate's lecture the other week, we only have enough food to supply for about 70% of our own population internally, and about 30% of the
70, did you say?
70%.
That's quite high, isn't it?
But 30% of the crops that we grow in the UK aren't harvested anyway due to agricultural techniques, which we could probably increase the gap up to a higher percentage. And obviously we get lots of commodities from abroad, so coffee, chocolate. If we stuck to locally grown agricultural foods, we should be able to be food secure. However, the current consumerism means we want all these luxuries that are affecting other countries, not just us.
okay, looking to the ladies now.
Oh, where do I start? Okay, briefly on food security, obviously it's not just about supply, it's very much about having enough food, which we do have in this country, either produced locally or through imports, and eating the right kinds of foods, and having, as you mentioned, the distribution. We had nearly 1 million people last year going to food banks, so clearly the distribution of the plenty of food that we have here is not good within our country. We have 40% of primary school children leaving primary school either obese or overweight, so a large part of that problem is down to what they're eating, or what they shouldn't be eating perhaps. So there are a lot of issues with food security in this country. For me, the biggest issue is the fourth element of the definition of food security, which is having enough available, having good access, utilisation, the right nutrition, but the fourth element is stability, so essentially having a sustainable food system. And I think that's where we're really falling down, because I don't believe our system is sustainable over the long term. It's very, very high energy inputs. That's the big issue about it. It's not resilient to climate change necessarily because we're too reliant on very few crops. And in that respect, coming back to Lydia's question, because I think you were also interested in the link between our food system and the global food system, and the fact that we may be importing from areas that are food deficient. Actually, for many farmers who are exporting green beans or bananas, that's their sole source of income. So if we suddenly say, okay, we're not going to have any bananas because we can't grow them here, that's not very good for those farmers. But for me, the more important thing is looking at how those bananas over there and our potatoes here are grown. In both cases, they should be grown with low energy input, they should be grown in an environmentally friendly way, what they call climate smart agriculture now, and in a fair way, so that the people who are producing the food gain fair benefits and are not exploited. We pay far too little for our food here. That means that those banana farmers and green bean farmers don't get a fair deal. Even our farmers, our dairy farmers, do not get a fair deal because milk is sold as a loss leader in supermarkets. Until the farmers are given the right price, farmers all over the world, for the food they produce, which recognises the fact that they're not just producing food but maintaining landscapes and all sorts of other ecosystem services. Once we recognise that, then we'll have a sustainable food system.
Perhaps we could ask the audience if they'd be prepared to pay more for the food in order to address some of the issues that Kate's talking about. So in order to give farmers decent livelihoods and to protect the environment, would you pay 20p more for a pint of milk?
No.
Would you pay 50p more for some kilos, for a kilo of green beans?
Depends how much secure minimum wage.
Oh, right.
A lot of people.
Tom at the back.
Well, it's not very well for us to say that because we're relatively well off people. We usually afford to pay like equivalently more per item, but a lot of people, or even in the UK, are pretty poor and probably couldn't really afford to pay much more.
So as comfortably off middle class folk, there's probably collectively most of the people in the room, we could probably say, yeah, we'll pay a bit more. We're shopping Waitrose and we buy the organic fair trade stuff rather than shopping in Aldi and buying the cheap stuff, which is what I tend to do these days.
You could save your money to buy organic milk by not buying meat. That's a good trade. Any non-meat eaters here?
I like meat.
So do I, but not every day.
Why don't I buy what I want to buy? When you say,
Because it
why are
has
you going to make rules to people what they should buy and what they shouldn't buy? You
Because
buy
it's
what
bad
you
for the
buy
environment,
and
simple
what you
as
can
that.
afford.
This
Bad for
is
the environment,
the
simple as
problem
that.
with the entire
It's
debate.
destroying the Amazon rainforest. Don't you care?
I didn't do that.
No, but if you buy meat, it'll destroy even more of it.
Yes, but you make a lot of people rich.
No, you said, why shouldn't you buy meat? You shouldn't buy meat because it destroys the Amazon rainforest. Simple as that, I think.
But the Amazon rainforest not being destroyed just to buy meat. It's doing it to make meat. It's being destroyed for all kinds of things.
Mainly to make fodder for meat cattle.
But who is benefiting from that? That is benefiting.
You're moving away from the
farmers.
subject. That's why you shouldn't buy meat.
Okay, let's try and turn this all. It's good that this is getting a little bit heated. Yes.
That's draconian.
I was going to refer to Will's question, answer about rationing. I think that'd be a great idea, but would it be possible without full-scale rising?
The Russians, do you think any government will get elected?
I'm not saying it's a good idea, I'm saying it's a possible solution.
Yeah.
I think we'd only get it if it became a necessity.
You are going to Russian migration.
Don't think Terry would be too keen on rationing.
What's that, sorry?
Rationing the food.
Rationing?
Rationing.
Well, I don't know. I'm probably one of the few people in here who's been through rationing. I went through rationing from the age of 0 to the age of, well, perhaps 7, yeah. But they stopped rationing when I was about 10, I think, and I didn't notice much difference. I was quite healthy under rationing, but that's because my mother was selling our pigs on the black market.
Okay, which is a good point to move on, I think, to our next question. And the third question on my list was going to come from Sam Edwards. Is Sam Edwards out there? Sam is on the MSc Environmental Monitoring and Assessments.
Hello, panel. With David Cameron declaring his party to be the greenest government ever, why have we gone from a Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs who dismisses human-induced climate change to a Secretary of State whose only real credentials are being a chartered accountant and who has 4 years' experience in Parliament prior to this role compared to her predecessors who had 8 years, 13 years and 15 years? Does this show that the government is not taking the role seriously?
Okay, just to repeat the gist of the question, the Conservative manifesto last time aimed for a future government to be the greenest government ever, and we've seen over the last year and a bit or so a Secretary of State for the Environment, Owen Paterson, who I suppose could be described as an anti-environmentalist, followed by a Secretary of State now whose background is in accountancy. Talia, you missed out last time. Would you mind going first now?
This is the only topic I didn't want to go first.
So when you go.
Well, I'm trying to get better at politics, so I have been trying to read up a lot on this. From what I know of the greenest ever party from their last campaign and what I read, I'm pretty sure that went out the window about a year after they actually got elected. And I'm pretty sure that there was 77, I think I read, targets that they were trying to reach, and I think they managed a minority of those, but the ones that they didn't, they failed on absolutely abysmally. And what I saw from some political journalists was basically saying that what they had failed on completely outweighed the ones that they had managed to reach their targets. So I think that to try and answer your question, I think that they have not been the greenest party ever, and I think that David Cameron had good intentions but has not followed through on them. And I think that as a Conservative party is quite focused on money and, well, kind of being greener costs a lot of money, that kind of takes the focus away from a lot of the other stuff that party wants to try and get re-elected with. So I think that they managed to get voted in and they've basically not really been that bothered. That's my opinion.
I think if we had Mr Cameron in here now, he'd probably say that we've been living through difficult times and it's all Labour's fault, and that we had to make some difficult decisions along the way, and maybe the environment was less important than the economy.
Well, the only stuff that I think that they actually managed to succeed on was stuff from the Labour Party that they brought in beforehand. So
The sad thing is that when you look, I saw a poll just a few weeks ago after the by-elections, which showed what issues people were concerned about when they're voting for people, and it wasn't. They didn't have only 3 issues; they had 10 issues, and the environment did not come up within the top 10. Not climate change, not the environment under any kind of guise. So it's a very sad reflection on our population as a whole. And I would agree with your sort of implication that it was essentially an election ploy, and they really haven't taken it forward at all. The current Secretary, Elizabeth Truss, there's one good thing to say about her, maybe 2. One, she's a woman, we need more women in Parliament. I don't say that will necessarily lead to better outcomes, but at least we'll have a better representation. The second thing is she likes apples. That was about the only thing that came out of her party conference speech. There's nothing else remotely useful in that speech. Of course, we could argue that the Labour Party has said a few things at least on energy, and then that's one of the biggest issues we're going to be dealing with. So I don't know how much of an election ploy that is. They're going to freeze energy prices. They've been talking about bringing in more green jobs and so on, but we've heard nothing like that on the Conservative side. But ultimately, you made one point, the fact that Elizabeth Truss has only had 4 years in Parliament. You're kind of implying that it's a low-level post. They give it to just about anybody. It's not a really important post, and that I really agree with. To me, we're not going to succeed on our issues until number 11 Downing Street is not the Chancellor of the Exchequer's home, but the Secretary of the Environment.
Okay, Okay, I would have liked a spontaneous round of applause. Maybe we should have rehearsed this, things are being told. Nathan?
It's not. Oh, go ahead.
Well, the problem is politicians. Like the current Elizabeth Truss studied economics. Owen Paterson studied history. The one previous to him, Caroline Spellman, did 15 years in agriculture. But the problem is they're all focusing on agriculture and not any other issues because the Conservatives are focused on the economy. That's all they're growing, is the economy.
And they're all big landowners.
Yeah.
Oh, come on. Don't show too much a left bias. They're not all big landowners. I know a lot of poor Conservatives. I'm one myself.
I think you're always going to have problems as well when you've got, what is it, Owen Paterson, who doesn't believe in climate change. I mean, they're supposed to be looking at environmental issues, and he's completely denying what the rest of the world has got very strong evidence to suggest. And he's being put in this position of power to try and make the environment better, yet he's denying something that's very, very obvious. So how are you ever going to succeed with someone like that in power?
I found that very curious because he was not a dumb man by any means, and Elizabeth Truss is a very smart woman. She's authored about 6 books, I believe. But yeah, I mean, I think there is something to gain from putting an accountant in that position, because if you think about carbon budgets and all this kind of thing, at its heart, isn't it really accounting and policies?
Well, I'd say they're the ones who will put the tick on the paper, but if they don't understand the subject, they're less likely to go for it. So it would be nice to have an MP that has a science degree and not people science.
Richard?
I was just going to make a point about the top 10 points you said that what people care about. I think what's happened is there's been a big con trick, in my opinion, since the coalition came to fund. That is that the only thing they talk about is austerity and growth. And to me, that is counter any environmental protection manifesto, because if you always sacrifice everything to overcoming austerity and improving economic growth, that will always be the case. People are conned into thinking that's all that matters. But a lot more matters to our world than economy and austerity. And I wonder whether austerity is also a big con in that when you see sort of the growth of some of the high street shops and people spending money in them, like tattoo parlours and nail bars, that sort of thing, you wonder, well, if people have got money to spend on that sort of stuff, is there really any austerity? Excuse me if that offends anybody. I'll talk to them about it later if they like. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, because it's not just the Department of Environment, it's the Department of Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs, or Food, is it? What's the F? Farming or Food?
Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs.
Well, there you are. And that's a massive right-wing lobby. The farming lobby is enormous, and they really are, they're the ones who I think are talking into Owen Paterson's ear about getting rid of these climate change idiots who are stopping us do whatever we want on our farms.
Having said that, I just want to come back on Terry's point. There are a few seeds of hope in the Tory party. There's a group of Tories called the 2020 Group, and they wrote a report earlier this year under the leadership of John Gummer, who's now Lord something or other. But basically they were talking about the fact that growth is just measured in GDP terms, and arguing that one shouldn't be doing that because that doesn't take into account resource depletion, and that one has to start looking at productivity in different terms, productivity not just in terms of labour, but productivity in terms of resource use efficiency. And that, I think, if that would find its way through the Tory party, that would be really good.
Okay, yes.
In fact, as much as I love how this conversation is going, don't you think it's more of that we need to stop blaming the politicians for not stepping up to the science degrees, but actually blaming our society, people sitting in this room who are studying science, who aren't stepping up to the politics side of things. And we're all staring at screens and learning stuff and researching stuff, but research only goes so far sometimes without people also who study science implementing it as well.
Okay, any two votes from the back?
If I might pick up on that, just after my 18th birthday, I was asked by a major political party to stand as an MP at the next election. And I said no, on the grounds I was too young and I knew diddly squat about life. Okay? There are too many politicians taking ministerial positions who don't know anything about their subject. However, there are not enough scientists and engineers being prepared to be politicians. And I think we have to redress the balance on both of these things before we start getting properly informed decisions, not just on the environment, but on the economy, on health and everything else.
Yes, Terry, I'll let you
I'm not going to make a point. I think the main thing is, and the lesson we should all learn, is you never trust any politician of any party to carry out any promises whatsoever. And after a long life, that is one of the lessons I've learned.
Wise words indeed. I'm conscious of the time. Some of you may have things to go to, and we may find that we're thrown out of this room. So my apologies to Cameron Little, who was fourth on my list. I'm going to strike you off because I have one short question to come, actually from Ian Williams.
So some of you may have seen that 2 University of East Anglia students hit the national news a couple of weeks ago because they were trying to inspire environmentalism on campus. They suggested that all students should wee in the shower in order to save the 12 litres of water it would take to flush the shower, to flush the toilet. Panellists, what do you think of this approach, and would you do this yourself?
I'm going to put the panel on the spot here, and actually going to find out what the panel do already. As an icebreaker, I will admit that I actually do wee in the shower, but my wife doesn't know. So Richard?
Well, yes, my anecdote, and this is it cropped up around our dinner table last weekend with all my family there, and apparently there are other reasons given, which is that it's good at combating things like C. difficile, isn't it, and other germs like that. Apparently, urine in the water system. This has been put out by scientists. But as I raised it around the table, and everybody there, apart from me, because I'm a well brought up boy, everyone there says they do, even my wife, and I had no idea. In terms of water saving, I would go for it.
Okay, Nathan?
Apologies to the 6 other people I'm living with that are in the room. I do as well.
But it's good for it.
Okay, Will?
As long as you're not sharing the shower at the time, I see no reason why not.
And Kate? You can abstain if you wish.
Okay, well, depends how you define a shower. When it's in a river where I've had to work where there's been no other water around and you do everything in the river, yes. And it's always been nice to know that the men have been further downstream from where the women had to go. Can I just say, with my scientist hat on, I think possibly I'd like to have some figures, because probably you end up spending longer in the shower because you're having a pee, presumably with the water on. And does that waste as much water as flushing the toilet? And with my just common sense hat on, I don't know, probably most women in this room will agree with me that we have spent quite a bit of time teaching our dads, our boyfriends, our husbands, and various sons and nephews to please pee in the bowl, not on the seat, not on the floor. And I'm just thinking, okay, if we relax the rules and say you can pee in the shower, then all of a sudden they're going to be peeing all over the place. And what next? They're going out in the gutter and saying, well, let's just pee in the drain, the rain will come, it's England, So I don't know, I think it's a very, very bad first step, I have to say.
It looks like we have strong governance in the shopping bag now, Talia?
Yeah, I think anyone who says that they don't are lying. I've been a swimmer for many years, and I know that more people pee in the pool than what they say. So I was peeing in the shower, I think it's definitely happens all the time. So I don't really know how it's going to make a difference. Because I think people do it already. So.
Okay, Simon Kemp on the back row.
You're saying your wife doesn't know. Somebody just posted on Twitter, she does now.
Thanks for that. Feature.
Can I advocate another approach? You're looking at urine as a waste product. It's a resource.
Yeah.
Composting. Dilute it 1 to 2 with water, and you will get more rapid composting of household digestible household waste. Get allotment and be directly into the compost bin like I do.
Don't go to dinner at Pete's house.
Okay, I think we're finished by actually involving the audience properly in this. You can choose not to put your hand up, but I'm going to ask you whether you do pee in the shower or whether you do not pee in the shower. And if you don't want to answer, you don't have to. So hands up if you do.
Photograph quickly.
Hands up if you don't. Do we have think that's a good time to finish. Thank you very much,
Never
everybody.
thought of it before.
Okay, so before I thank my panel, can I just advertise next week's seminar, which is going to be a double header featuring 2 students involved in the Assets project that is looking at ecosystem services and poverty alleviation in developing countries. So I hope we get a good attendance for that. Can you all thank Richard Lemon, Nathan Fox, Will Warren, Kate Schreckenberg and Talia Sherwood one more time, and thank you for your participation.